Okay, still in Hebrews. This is the words of the day. This is a word we've been looking at, pistis, because that means to be persuaded, and we're in the pistis chapter. 11 is the pistis chapter. And so I picked a couple of really interesting words for you, because here's this, P-A-T-R-I-D-A, patrida, but it's Patris. And so Patris, you think, okay, from Patris, this sounds like pater, right? Which is father. Well, it kind of is and it kind of isn't. Because the word itself comes from para, near, and, what's the other one? Para and, from parasemos, and let's see, what's the other word? This is interesting. Simeno. And semeno, you know what that is, right? That's the, what's the English word?
Semantics?
No, well, it could be, but it's the markings on it comes from, you see it in John, it's oh man, what is it? It's the signs. This is a word for signs. So in Mark or in John, we have the 7 signs, right? And the signs and they're called somata. Somata are the signs that people will show, the signs of Christ, right? The pierced, well, they weren't pierced hands, they're pierced wrists and ankles. The somata are the signs, and that's where it comes from, and people will have bleeding somata. Yeah.
No, that's what I was going to mention. You hear about people that all of a sudden start bleeding and.
Right. Those are called somata, and that's a word, and I think it's
stigmata.
Stigmata. Stigmata.
Yeah.
That's it. Stigmata. Stigmata is the Latin, and then the Greek is semeno. But this is sign, near sign. So the word is translated. It looks like patris, like as in father, and it is translated as a fatherland. But that's not where it comes from. It comes from near and basically a sign or a label. So they say a figurehead of a ship, which is really interesting. So here's a word that sounds like, right, something we're familiar with and is like something we're familiar with, but yet comes from a different source. I thought that was interesting because the Greeks themselves would say, is that unusual in Greek? Kinda, right? It's kind of unusual in Greek, and it may be that we have borrowed this word ourselves because of its sound, rather than from its origin, per se. So anyway, I thought that was kind of a neat word. This is a really interesting word, too. This is in azai, and then B-E-S-A-N, exhibason. Exhibason, okay, so it's got that guttural sound. But anyway, ex is a primary preposition that means from or out of. And then ibeno means basically to go. This is go. Now, all right, Saxon. Go. I have gone, and he went. Right? So in English, let's see, go, and I go, I went, and I have gone. Well, my point is this. Go is one of those primary Anglo-Saxon words we get, right? That has declensions. And the reason it has odd declensions is because it's Anglo-Saxon, as opposed to other words. What's really funny is this is the word ibeno, or beno, and beno Does that look like a simple word to you? I just want to point it out because it's not a simple word. Usually, Beto, how many syllables? Yeah, more than one syllable. Usually in cultures, when you have really simple words you use all the time, how many syllables?
One syllable.
One syllable. Because that, you know, and by the way, how, well, I mean, this may not be totally prevalent or totally important, but it points out something within their culture. So we have, like, for example, anyone who's studied foreign languages, how many foreign languages have a word like go, where we use it all the time for everything, right? I'm coming and I'm going. They don't use those words, right? In German, you're not going or coming, you are walking, running, flying, swimming, because they put the verb in for the means, where the word go generically is very common in English, and we use it in all kinds of constructions, where in other foreign languages, it's not. So it's kind of interesting that, number one, Greek has a construction which is like go, and that it's, well, the reason I gave you this word is I think it's kind of cool because it means to come from, but this is the only place you find it in the New Testament. Matter of fact, it's such an odd word that Strong's never had it in his Greek lexicon. Remember Strong's, Vines, and Woodhouse? Woodhouse is classical Greek. Strong's and Vines is Koine Greek. So Vines has it in there, but Strong never had it. And Strong, you know, this is a missing word that is only in one place. So an uncommon word, right? I just thought that was kind of neat. Well, we'll see how it fits too. So these aren't really contentious words, they're just interesting words. Now,
Oh, you're talking about foreign language. It says like the point whence action or motion proceeds. Like German has that kind of thing. Like from where did you go? You know, we don't really have that anymore.
Yes.
So much. So like that.
Yeah, and plus we do this. We do prepositional phrases, but in German the prepositions are tied to the verbs. So in German, let's see if I got the right one. Ausschlüssel, to unlock. Ausschließen and anschließen, to lock and unlock. They're verb tense forms, and when I put them in a sentence, I put them at the end of the sentence. So, schloss an, he locked the door. He locked, basically. So, yeah, other languages, like Greek, what does Greek do is very similar to English. They add prepositions and suffixes. And we have prepositional phrases, but that comes out of our Anglo-Saxon. So we gotta, don't talk about how complex English is. English is probably the most complex language there is. We have more verb forms, and part of the problem of translating is the number of verb forms we have and the way of expressing things that we have is much different than other languages, which makes Greek easy because it's concrete, right? And the verb forms are very specific. We were looking at 13. Here's the NIV. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, and they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on earth. The translation of this was, they all died off being persuaded, yet not having been given the gospel message of God. They saw other things themselves from afar and were convinced. And they enfolded this in their arms and assented, demonstrating that they were foreign and aliens alongside on the soil. And I mentioned to you that the soil means both the earth and the promised land. The land they're now barred from, because this was talking specifically about Jacob and Abram, and so Abram had moved out of the Ur of the Chaldees, right, into the promised land, and then Jacob, we're just getting to the point where Jacob and the guys and gals are going to Egypt. So we'll see how that plays out. But Abram was promised this land. The point was, he died off being persuaded, but yet not having given the gospel message of God. In other words, he was promised the land, but he never saw it. And this goes back, and that's why I've got it at the top here. Remember, in this chapter, this is verse 1. Persuasion stands under an expectation of proof of deeds not seen. So the expectation of each of the persuasions, or those persuaded, is they didn't necessarily see the end, but yet they were persuaded. And by the way, the point to make in here is that on each occasion, did God show them a reason to be persuaded? Yeah. He gave them evidences, not the end point. They were all going to the end point, which is verse 2, that I want you to always remember. Assigning a reason, in this the members of the Israelite Sanhedrin became a witness. So we have the two statements at the very beginning of this chapter, which, by the way, I'm not asserting that this is an intro body conclusion, but rather, it's still a logos to telos. It's just that our author is kind of helping us because they're presenting to us the form that they're going to give. This is almost Hebraic form, and you can see that, right, in the language it's used. Hebraic form, body, synopsis, body. So I have a synopsis, and I'm getting the body. You can't deny we saw this in other New Testament works too. Although they're supposed to all be in Greek logos to telos form, they also fall into the Hebraic form in some patterns. And we've also seen evidence that the Roman form has cropped up, especially in Luke and Acts. If you remember Luke and Acts, those forms have cropped up. Maybe I'll do, Tammy said I should do Luke next. I haven't done Luke other than a body thing. But anyway, so in 13, by the way, Leviticus 25:23, and we didn't get to that last week. So Leviticus 25:23. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but it starts with, I'll start with 1. The Lord said to Moses on Mount Sinai, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. That's the beginning of this chapter. Remember, chapters were added, at least 600 years later, maybe 800 years later than this time period. So in 23, it says, the land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and my tenants. So when the land was given to the children, to the different tribes of Israel, right, the land was parceled out by family. And the big deal was the families retaining possession of the land. The problem is the Greek problem, and I think God gave it to them intentionally. You know what the Greek problem was, right? Greek problem? So, in a demi, so here's the demis. And the demis are family groups. So each family group has, a partial in a demi. And each family, as the sons come to their inheritance, right? So the inheritance, the major son may get this much, and the other sons get this much. And then they have to divide it, the next son, right? And sons. And sons, and eventually, what happens?
Yeah,
There's nothing left. And so the British solved this problem, and the Greeks eventually solved the problem. The Hebrews weren't there yet. How'd they solve it?
Just all goes to the first one.
The firstborn inherits it all, and everybody else has to go home, right?
You have to find a profession.
So, but when you start, it looks like you have all you need, right? But in the end, it doesn't. But I think this was an intentional point that God was making. Okay, that's theological, right? Anyway, this is a point. So the land must not be sold permanently, because the land is mine, and you are but aliens and my tenants. And by the way, that goes to the
Yeah, in church.
sermon today, right? There's a lot to be said about that sermon. I thought it was very interesting, and also that parable. But in any case, and this is, Leviticus is really long, but this specific 25th chapter is really long. Anyway, so what I want you to see is in the rabbinic context, the readers or the hearers of this are immediately drawn to this information. And why is this pertinent? I told you. And we've been looking at this. So most likely this was written after the destruction of Jerusalem after 70 AD. So let's say 80 AD. And so Jerusalem has been destroyed. You have the Galil, you have Babylon over this way, and then you have Alexandria. We're going to see even more evidence that this was written to the Alexandrians and to Alexandria. But, okay. You know, Abram was promised. He never saw the full reflection. The land was not supposed to be sold. Who's owning the land now? Who owns Jerusalem? The Romans. The Romans own the whole thing. Actually, see, I can't remember if Herod was kicked out yet. Herod was eventually banished to Herod's son. Herod the Great croaked, but then his son, the three sons, this was what do you call it? A quadrat. There were four parts, but eventually the first son was insane. He's dumped. I don't know if he got killed, whatever. Then Pilate eventually took over Jerusalem. That was from one of the Herod's sons. And then the other Herod's son eventually lost his property. So all that was left was Herod, the son that the other Herod's son named Herod. He was banished to Gaul, which that was not like it wasn't a positive place at all to go. And eventually the Romans took over the whole thing. And this is, in this period, the Romans are in charge. The procurator of the Romans is in charge of everything. Yes, sir.
So did Rome take over all ownership of the land? I mean, they had control of the people, but did they still not allow personal ownership, personal property?
Yeah, this was, remember, the Romans were that third generation of conquerors. And they figured out this was before capitalism was considered capitalism, but there was money, so they are capitalists. They're good capitalists. And they recognized that if you go in and take over everything, now you've got a socialist state where the people are working for you, and how good is their productivity?
No incentive.
Yeah, there's no incentive. They're barely feeding themselves. So instead of enslaving and reducing the nation, they allowed the people to own their property and own their lands, and they charged tribute. They didn't call it taxes at that time. It was tribute. You're paying tribute to Rome. And if you remember, Jesus told them not to pay tribute to Rome. I think he was trying to cause an insurrection there, which is, well, why should Rome get your tribute anyway? But in any case, the big deal was they were allowing the people, but the problem was that the nature of this, of both the people and the culture and lands, the Romans didn't fully comprehend. The Romans were working on Greek rationalism. What were the rabbis and the Hebrews working on? Hebraic thinking.
Their tradition.
Well, we call it tradition, but it's really Hebraic thinking. And the Hebraic thinking, you notice in the New Testament, especially in the Gospels, okay, Jesus is a Greek thinker who's talking Greek rationalism to them. And what do the disciples always say?
I don't get it.
I don't get it. We read it and we go, well, we get it. That's because we're Greek rationalists. We're like the Romans. The Romans went in, they said, we want to build aqueducts. So you're not getting, well, they didn't know at the time you get typhus, cholera, but they believed that stagnant water caused disease, malaria, malaria, right? They believe that, which they're kind of correct. So the Romans always have known this for a long time. You bring running water into the cities and you provide running water fountains, right, for both bathing and for drinking. because for some reason, it prevents malair, right? It prevents dis-ease, and it somehow protects the people. So they said, well, we want to bring that in. The problem is, what kind of wells are they used to?
Non-running.
Yeah.
Non-running wells.
Jacob's well.
Deep,
Yeah.
still wells.
Still deep, still wells. And as a matter of fact, if you remember Ezekiel, I don't know how much trouble he got, I haven't studied this, but remember Ezekiel made a well at Siloam, right? Shiloh's well, Siloam, which came from the mountains, and at the first was bubbling, right? That's the pool of Shiloach, where they bring the water in the 118th Psalm. Every year they bring the water to cleanse the final cleansing of the altar. So, and that's in Palms, the palm, the Layla, the Festival of Booths, and at the end of the Festival of Booths is when they clean the altar, and that's when the pronouncement is, it's huge, it's deep stuff. Anyway,
And it's in our sermon today,
And
Psalm
it's-
118.
that's right, Psalm 118. At the end of Psalm 118 it says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and the high priest stops. He says, blessed is he who comes in the name of Yahweh, except at that time they said, Yahweh. And they didn't know how to pronounce it. So they said that, and they waited, because at that moment the Messiah was supposed to reveal himself. And guess what Jesus did in John? And John, I think, and in Luke and Matthew. When he reached that point at the Festival of Booths, Jesus said, I am the water of life. I have the water of life, right? He was basically pronouncing he was the Messiah. And that's when they wanted to arrest him, but they couldn't. And you know, that was a huge deal. But the point was, the water came from the pool of Shiloach. And the pool of Shiloach, when, was it Ezekiel? I think it was Ezekiel. When Ezekiel first made that pool, it came from the mountains and cascaded down, and it was a moving pool. By the time of Jerusalem in this period, it was no longer a moving pool. The water still seeped in, and remember, the poor people would lay around the edges waiting for movement in the water, because when there was movement on the water, the Holy Spirit of God, Ruach HaKodesh, was working in the water, and the first person there would be healed. That was their tradition. So, you have, and if you want to call it tradition or, you know, event horizon or their culture or their views, the rabbinic view is very different than the Greek rational view. And I've told you before, the best place to see this is in how the rabbis taught. The rabbis taught by, you come to the rabbi and you say, hey rabbi, I want to be your student. And the rabbi would probably test you. He would probably say, tell me what the Torah says, la la la. And you would recite the Torah. And when he would probably get a report back from your rabbi who had taught you the Torah and knew that you knew the Torah. Then he would sit down and he would, with the books, and you would look over his shoulder as he read the books, and you would memorize the other books of the Torah, and then you would memorize the books later. He would recite the Mishnah to you. They're not written down at this period. And you would memorize the Mishnah. And then he would have you memorize the commentary on the Mishnah. So you have the Mishnah, you have the other books, the Tanakh, the Torah, the Tanakh, the other books of the Mishnah that's not written, and then you have the commentary on the Mishnah. After you memorize all of that and you're 59 years old and you have a cane, then maybe you can make commentary on it. This is why Jesus was so, remember when he was 8 years old and he went to the temple?
13,
13? Was he
12 or 13.
12, 13? Anyway, when he went to the, I thought he was younger than that.
No, it's 12.
Was he 12? When he went to the temple, he astounded them. You know why he astounded them?
He knew everything.
Well, every kid knew the Torah. Every kid had memorized the Torah by the time they're 12. That's the bar mitzvah, right? That's the requirement, was you would then read the lesson in the Torah. That was your bar mitzvah. Every male was expected to do that. But that wasn't what got the Sadducees excited. What got the Sadducees excited is he knew all of the Tanakh as well as the Torah. It's very evident. And he obviously knew, I suspect he knew the Mishnah and the commentary on the Mishnah. Because the Pharisees got all riled up about it, right? And everybody's riled up. If you know all that, then you can, in Jewish thought, you can make commentary. As opposed to the Greek worldview. What's the Greek worldview? If you have a question, what do? You ask the questions. In the Socratic method, who's asking the questions? Because remember Socratic method? The teacher asks the questions. That's one of the reasons I ask questions, not to foil you or make you feel stupid or whatever, but because if I ask you questions, I'm not trying to lead you to an answer. I'm trying to give you hints or ideas or project a question that makes your mind go, oh, right? The Greek worldview is the teacher asks, and you notice how Jesus asked questions all the time of his disciples, right? And they never could answer his questions. The point was they weren't used to this give and take. And so the rational Greek view versus, and the Romans were into the rational Greek view. That was their whole big deal compared to the Hebraic view of the world. So we see this contrasted. And I think it's important. I mean, we've gone over these things before. I'm just paraphrasing or summarizing to a great deal. Anyway, let's see what 14 says. 14 NIV says, people who say such things show they are looking for a country of their own. They say, what things? What things are they saying? The things they are saying is, they all died off being persuaded, yet not having been given the gospel message of God. They saw other things themselves from afar and were convinced. And they enfolded this in their arms and assented, demonstrating that they were foreign and aliens alongside the soil. People who say such things. The saying such things were that they were convinced. They were convinced of the fact that they own the soil, they own the land, right? And they were convinced of the Leviticus, right? God said, I'm giving you this land. They're reading this from the Leviticus point. They assented, demonstrating they were foreign and aliens alongside the soil, although I'm not sure that foreign and aliens is quite the exact point that's trying to make. They are foreign and aliens alongside the soil. Why? Where are they ultimately going? Yeah, the soil is the earth. So the question is, okay, what is the point? They say such things. So let's see what it says in the Greek, because the Greek will give us probably much better, it'll help explain it better to us. So 14:4, gar, assigning a reason, they that, it's not they that, it's just the, lego, logical argument, argue logically, such things, totos, truly this, declare plainly, emphasio, to exhibit. And basically, emphazino means that it's apparent in itself. That is hote, is demonstrate that. I think it's spelled demonstrate wrong. Yeah. They see, my spelling checker a long time ago gave up because there's so many Greek words in here and it doesn't have a clue. So when it comes up, it says, I don't have a clue. I can't do your spelling corrections, so I get funny words in there. Demonstrate that they seek epizeto, to search for a fatherland. And here's where we get that word, fatherland. So here's a literal, assigning a reason, the arguing logically, truly this exhibits, apparent in itself, demonstrating that they search for a fatherland. And so here's a translation of this. Assigning a reason by arguing logically, truly this makes apparent in itself, demonstrating that they searched for a homeland. Okay, what homeland are they searching for? You got 3 of these going on. The first homeland they're searching for,
Israel.
yeah,
Those Israel.
they're promised. And in Leviticus it says this is forever and they're tenants, right? Forever. The second homeland they're looking for. They got kicked out. Where are we going to go? Well, they went, we know, to Alexandria. Now, before this, other Jews were kicked out. You know, the diasporas, the multiple diasporas. You got the diaspora to the to Nineveh. Who are those guys? The Syrians. You know, during that period, the first kingdom period, the 2 kingdom period. Then you have the second kingdom. Darius and Babylon, right, took them, and you have that diaspora, right? And then I have a third diaspora. It's just there's a general diaspora, and that diaspora is basically a proselytizing diaspora. But there's problems with that proselytizing diaspora, right? What's the big problem with the proselytizing diaspora of the Pharisees?
It was illegal by the Roman government.
It was illegal by the Roman government, but there's also a theological problem for the Pharisees.
Well, you haven't got Jerusalem anymore, right?
Yeah.
No temple and no way to sacrifice.
No way to sacrifice.
So if you get people to come into your belief system, how are they going to have their sins atoned for then?
The atonement of sins. There's also a couple of other problems. What is required of every Jewish male?
Circumcision.
Yeah, the circumcision.
Pilgrimages.
The pilgrimages.
So, yeah,
Yeah, I got 6 festivals, right? The 6 festivals that everybody's supposed to do, and I got the 3 pilgrim festivals. So if you're living in Rome and you're a Jew or a proselyte, you know, or a converted Jew, how are you going to get to Jerusalem? And by the way, if you don't hear the shofar, you guys know this, right? If you don't hear the shofar, you know, sounded on the walls of Jerusalem during the pilgrim festival, which one? Yom Kippur? I think it's Yom Kippur. What happens?
You're left in your sins.
Forever. Yeah, if you don't hear it once. If you eat, remember, if you eat any leaven during the Passover, even a bite, even a little bit, what happens? You're condemned forever. The biggest problem is the Passover, well, you know, all the pilgrim festivals, the Passover lamb is supposed to be sacrificed where?
In the temple.
In the temple of Jerusalem, right? And if you don't do it, what happens? If you don't, all of these, there are 36 things that are unforgivable. The unforgivable 36. I told you, right? If you go look in the Jewish handbook, go get your Jewish handbook out. It's only this thick. Get your Jewish handbook out, and no kidding, it will tell you the 36 unforgivables. There are 36 unforgivable things that atonement and sacrifice cannot take care of. And so the proselytizing diaspora of the Pharisees had a significant theological problem. They were already, and they'd already kind of gotten, why had they already kind of figured this out? You know, right? They already had 2 diasporas. And so they had already given away the theological roots, underpinnings of their whole system. There's a reason for this. I'm not going to talk about it. Well, you can figure it out. Put your foot in the theological pool, right? What was God doing, do you think?
He was trying to communicate that it was impossible to have atonement for your sins without Jesus.
making a way for Jesus.
Exactly. You know, I think this is a beautiful picture. The problem is the people of this time, I think they got it. And so when Paul, look in Acts, we talk about Acts, and he talks about the 36 things that are unforgivable, right? And only Christ can forgive them. He doesn't say 36, but the point was he was making allusion to all of the things that were unforgivable in the Jewish system. And they knew it. They taught it every day. And he said the answer is
Jesus.
Jesus. The answer is Christ. So the whole of Hebrews is to point us to that answer. So every time we see these, assigning a reason by arguing logically, truly this makes apparent in itself, demonstrating that they search for a homeland. The first one was Jerusalem, Israel. The second is they're in the diaspora. And the third is from the gay, it's the epiuranos. In other words, that's what Hebrews starts with, right? The temple in heaven, the epiuranos, that is the temples on earth are a symbol of, right? So, okay, the Greeks are incredibly concrete. So I don't think it's talking about a fatherland, right? The word obviously does not mean fatherland. It means a homeland or a place basically that's marked out as your own. And by the way, you notice near sign, stigmata, semea. The point of that is, what do you do for your land? What did the Israelis do? What did the Jews do?
Boundary stones.
Yes, they marked it with boundary stones. We do the same thing. When you buy a parcel of land, the survey guys come out and they either find the old survey marks or they put down new survey marks where they have surveyed. They'll put down a piece of rebar, right? And it'll be marked. And they're supposed to say the date of the survey and have all the information on it. Those get worn out, but the point is, that's what a near sign is. That you're marking out your point. The point they're marking out is a point that's not necessarily on earth. And that's the whole point of this.
But isn't patris, isn't that related to patria or father? That's in the Greek. So fatherland would be kind of a literal translation, I suppose.
That's why I went through this. The word is patrida. Patar is what it sounds like. It sounds like patar, right? Like father. That's actually, this isn't, it's Latin and Greek. But it's not. It's para semano. So the word patris, the word that is, that's why I said at the beginning, it sounds like father. But it's not father. It means near sign. It's not related at all. And so this is one of those Greek words. The Greeks, if we were sitting with Socrates, and Marquis did this, go look at, which one is it? One of the 5 of the final dialogues. It's in my book. But anyway, when Socrates sat down with them, the argument that the Greeks made about their language was that it was, the reason that they called everybody else a barbarian is because the barbarians' language was not reasoned and logical like the Greeks thought their language was. They believed that their language was completely reasoned. And so they would say that my words, right, just like this, from, go. It means to come from or to go, right? They would say that this makes complete sense because I can understand this as long as I understand these parts of speech, right? This verb and these prefixes.
Sorry, I guess my mind must have wandered.
It's all right.
Earlier.
But see, this word looks like patris, right? And you'd think, well, we should translate it fatherland. But there's no father in it. It's para. The Greeks would say, this makes total sense. And I guess you could call it a fatherland, that's okay. But it really means a near sign. In other words, a land that you have marked off with a boundary. And, by the way, we all remember the word that means to inherit? And the word that means law? Nomos? Nomos means the partitioning of land. Basically, the law in the Greeks regarded mostly partitioning of land. Who owned land and your rights to land? That's what nomos means, is that partitioning of land. And the inheritors, right? All the words about inheritance have to do with the partitioning of land and the inheritance of land. So, I'm just saying, you know, to us, law means what? Don't go over the speed limit. Don't do this. But that's not what it meant to early societies. And by the way, that's not what it meant to John Locke. John Locke said the purpose of government is to protect private property, in which he meant primarily land, life, and liberty. But anyway, these are really important points. Anyway, let's go to 15. As far as I know, there are no Old Testament direct correlations with that verse. But in 15 it says in the NIV, if they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had the opportunity to return. Okay, let's see what the Hebrew or the Greek says. Kai, truly, it's men. It means in fact. If, that's I, they had been mindful, moneo, to exercise the memory of that, ekenos, that one, country is added. From, it's not from, it's off. Whence, hos. The, it's not, it's just the. They came out of ekbeno, to come from. Ekbeno, right here. Ekbeno. They is added. Might is not white, it's whatsoever. Have had, it's echo, to hold. Opportunity, it's karios, an occasion. To have returned, it's anakampto, to turn back. So here's a literal. And in fact, if they had exercised their memory, that one off the they came from, the whatsoever held an occasion to turn back. So here's the translation. And in fact, if they had exercised their memory about the place they came from, they might have had an occasion to turn back. If they had exercised their memory about the place they came from, they might have had an occasion to turn back.
Sounds like the Hebrews, after they were led out of Egypt, and they just kept complaining, let's go back. I mean, yeah, we had food and, it just, you just shake your head at them. But they were thinking they didn't believe God's promises. They didn't have faith in that. And so they kept thinking of their slavery and wanting to return.
And what you're saying is, we haven't gotten to the Egypt part yet, right? What do you think this is? This is what we call a foreshadowing. But guess what? You did it. You are thinking just like they're thinking. Because when they hear this, what do they want to do? If these are people in Alexandria, I don't care where they are, wherever they went, but let's say they are in Alexandria, what do they want to do?
Go home.
They want to go home. They want to go back. They want to go back and do what they were doing, right? They want to go back to the sacrificial system that they were used to everything they're used to. They want to go back because the world has been overturned for them.
Right, well, they had that same problem in Babylon, that they prayed in the direction of Jerusalem all the time because they longed for Jerusalem. It was their home, it was their comfort zone.
Yes, and then, this is really interesting. When they were allowed to then return to Jerusalem, did a lot of them go back? No, they didn't.
Because they were making a good profit right there in Babylon.
Precisely. And even more than that, who was left in Israel?
The poorest.
Well, in Israel is the Samaritans then.
And they brought in other people that
Right, intermingled,
weren't Israelis, so there was a mix. There was a mix there.
Okay, I know that that's what they say. All right, I know that's what they say. I don't agree with that at all. The reason I don't agree with it is because, remember, okay, well, where would the intermixing that happened, they were supposed to clean out all of Israel. Did they? Nope. So what happened? They had a lot of intermingling, right? Which caused them problems forever through the kingdom which led to the very first wrong conclusion by the Israelis. The first wrong conclusion, I think God said you're not right. And that was, we need to exclude all our foreign brides. And guess what? Almost all of them had foreign brides. So they dumped a whole generation. The people that were in Jerusalem, yes, I'm sure they had some others moving in there. But look, what's the value of this land? By the way, where is the valuable farmland and land in this area? Do you know?
Egypt,
Huh?
down in Egypt.
Well, no, let's not even talk about Egypt. Let's just talk about the Levant. In the Levant, where is the good land? Huh?
Along the Jordan River, isn't it?
Well, not all the Jordan River, because here's the Sea of Galilee, and then there's Jordan River going down to the Dead Sea. And
around there.
this is Jericho. Jericho's here. There's Jerusalem, and you have to take the mountain trails because this is all mountain. It's all mountain. And right here, there's a thing called the Escadrion. The Escadrion is a huge open plain area that was caused by a glacier way, way back. So it's a large, very, very large valley. So the Escadrion, which is near the Sea of Galilee, and this area right here, by the way, the Decathlon is, the 10 cities of the Decathlon are over here. Decapolis, Decapolis are here. And then the Galil is here. This is where all the great farmland is. What's down here? Desert, rocks, mountains. Why is it important though? What's the big deal about the down here part?
Trade routes.
Trade routes, yes. The trade routes to Babylon, the trade routes to Egypt. There is there's two ports. There's a northern port that isn't that great, and a southern port. This port was destroyed by Alexander way back. That was the one that the Bible predicted would be destroyed, right? And Alexander destroyed it by building a causeway. Tyre, right? And Tyre was not operational at the point. It wasn't a very good deep water port, especially after Alexander put all the rocks in there. The best deep water port was Caesar Maritima. By the way, Caesar Maritima is where, that's where Pilate spent most of his time, and that's where the head spent most of his time. There was also a port up in the Syrian area, but it was too far away to make any kind of goodness. Lebanon, of course, had some relatively good growing areas, but it's northern. So, who's coming? I mean, okay, so let's say you're a refugee. Where are you going to go? Like Syria, a Syrian refugee. I mean, that's that area. Are you going to stay there? No. I'm just saying, okay, there's an assumption that for some reason, okay, what is the Israeli assumption? What is the Babylonian return assumption?
The ones that returned were deemed to be pure Jews, and they looked down on anyone that didn't have that status. And probably peasants, who knows, what their status was.
Well,
but they during that time, the group that was left developed other worship types. They really didn't worship the way that the Jews had worshipped, and so they had adopted foreign things, and
okay.
and that is why the Jews were so prejudiced against them.
Okay, so the ones in Babylon, how did they worship?
Well, yeah, they were really stymied because Babylon wanted them to worship only their own way. However, people like Daniel said that 3 times a day he prayed looking to Jerusalem, and there were some that of his character that followed his ways, But of course he was a eunuch, so he didn't have to worry about marriage, but I don't know, they didn't talk about,
So how did
about
he,
taking Jewish women with them, you know, so
But even,
there was probably an awful lot of intermarriage with Babylonian women.
but
Oh,
even
yeah.
best case scenario, like the faithful Daniel and others could not go to Jerusalem or be there or sacrifice there.
that's right. And by the way, how many times did it tell you to pray in the Old Testament? 0. How many times did it tell you to sacrifice in the Old Testament? All the time. Look, the big deal is, okay, why do we not know about the story of the Samaritan Daniel? The Samaritan Daniel who, and all of his friends, all of his many, many friends, who never married foreign women and never had foreign children and always bowed their heads to Jerusalem all the time. Why? What did the Babylonians take to Babylon?
The best and the brightest.
The educated class. Well, it wasn't the best and brightest. It was the nobility.
Right.
They took the nobility and they made eunuchs of them.
Right.
And so guess how many, okay, if they're eunuchs, if all the princes and all the courtiers and all the royalty of Jerusalem were taken to Babylon and made eunuchs, who's the next generation? What did Abraham do? Abraham had this guy of Damascus, right? Ezra, whatever, Damascus, that he was adopting. What do you think the Israelis had to do? How pure is their strain?
Not as pure as they'd like you to believe.
The reason that the pureblood Daniels, the many pureblood Daniels and the Samaritans, the reason that they didn't have it, they couldn't write it. They couldn't write it, right? Because they were not the educated class. So there may have been a whole generation of Samaritans. That's why how did Jesus treat the Samaritans?
As well as the Jews,
Yeah, as a matter of fact, how did he treat the Gentiles?
pretty well too.
Well, remember what he told the Gentile woman?
Oh, yeah.
The Samaritans he always accepted. But the Gentiles, he basically brushed them off. Because he said, this is for the children of Jerusalem. These are for the Israel, not for the Gentiles. Immediately, right then, right? His message was for them immediately. So, I'm just saying, where's the purebloods? In the Samaritans. Where's those? And by the way, could the Samaritans worship in Jerusalem?
No,
Nope. So what they have to do? They were still sacrificing.
they developed their own place.
They did. And guess what? The Essenes did. And so did the Pharisees. And so did the Sadducees. And so did the Zealots. And so did the
So despite all
Alexandrians.
this looking down on each other and stuff, they're all in the same boat, basically.
They're all in the same boat. And this is, I find it amazingly disingenuous. And this is why I get irritated. Because I think Jesus Christ, when he looked at the Samaritans, said, here are the purebloods. Here are the Israeli, here's the Israeli people, and look where they are. As a matter of fact, it's even worse than that. These Pharisees and Sadducees that came back from Babylon, do you think they would hire Samaritan? No, they didn't want to be near him, right? Why did they want to be near him? It's like they have cooties,
Yeah, unclean.
right? Unclean. And yet, they're probably more clean and less, diverse as a genetic pool than any of the Babylonian Jews. I'm just saying, I find it very amazing. So the authors, the realities of the time, I think, are catching up with them. And Jesus himself, and Paul said, in teen hodos, there's neither free nor unfree. There's neither man nor woman, right? That everyone is equal. There's no Samaritans and Jews. There's no Gentiles and Jews, right? And so the message, what a beautiful message, especially for the Alexandrians that have the same question we have. Our question is, well, is this pertinent, right? Is this pertinent to me? And that's what they're asking. And this answer right here, And in fact, if they had exercised their memory about the place they came from, they might have had an occasion to turn back. Guess what? None of these people had an occasion to turn back. None of these people had an occasion to turn back. They would have been executed, right? These people would have been executed. They wanted to go back. However, you always have an expectation of heaven, the Epiuranos. Anyway, so this refers to the now and the past of the people of Israel. And the problem is they chose to go because they were persuaded. And so we're continuing on this. There are no direct allusions from the Old Testament or from the Apocrypha on 15. But as we continue, we'll see there's even more. Because we're going to get into, 16 begins to get into, it just continues this. We'll hit that. Thank you, Father, for your word. We pray you look out this week. In your name we pray, amen.
I'm missing last week's, because I had